Welcome to another session of Learning Curve Live, a monthly webinar on the first Wednesday of every month, where we have our guests discuss one or two articles which have appeared in the current issue. These are very lively discussions, and a lot of views are exchanged. And this time, we have two articles that we are going to discuss. One of them is called Social Justice, the Core of Learning, and the other is The Elephant in the Room, SEL Deficient Learning. We have with us today the authors of both these articles, Ragini Lalit, who has written Social Justice, the Core of Learning, and Shubham Raturi, who has written The Elephant in the Room, SEL Deficient Learning. In the past, we have thought that, learning is an academic venture. And that's all there is to learning in the classroom is academics, academics, and more academics. But recent research and anecdotal evidence has shown that just academics won't do. We have to consider the human being, the child particularly, as a composite whole consisting of brain, mind, emotions, feelings. And we have to respect all parts of this if we want to get the best out of any child. It's also clear that everyone has a different best. Everyone has something to contribute, and there is no one gold standard that everybody has to achieve in order to be called educated or anything like that. So, welcome, a very warm welcome to everybody who has come. And I would like, it's my pleasure to introduce our guest today. Ragini Lalit is a research associate in the Interest Group for Dialogue, Fraternity and Justice in the Azim Premji University, Bengaluru. In this webinar, she explores what it means to create critical learning spaces for children and young adults that are centered on hope and compassion. She is particularly interested in the use of children's literature and performing arts in education. Welcome, Ragini. Thank you for joining us. Shubham
Okay.
Raturi is a resource person at the Azim Premji Foundation, Kumbhalghar, Rajasthan. Apart from working with teachers and youngsters on their perspective on societal issues and content based themes, he remains actively involved in the learning of second language, especially English, by young learners. His work with young adults involves people from the ages of 18 to 30, involves discussions of societal issues in a non-judgmental space. Welcome to both of you. And now we hope to have a lively discussion on these two. Shall we start off with the first? Shall we start off with the first question? I'll just start it off. Both your articles deal with the all important issue of empathy and understanding and emotional health as an essential factor towards learning. This is a new development. Until quite recently, academics was the only thing schools concerned themselves with. What do you think brought about this change?
Starting off with this, the question that you mentioned. Uh, if we look at recent statistics, for example, I would like to quote a recent study that was brought out by the NCRB, the National Crime Records Bureau. We get to see about frequent cases, frequent suicide cases, and if we look at the year 2021, so the statistics they show about 864 of our students, young promising careers, lives, they were taken just because they failed in an exam. So the entire setup has been becoming so academically oriented that we're not looking at life as something to live, rather than it has become a sort of a rat race, which is quite meaningless. and at the same time, the students are being trusted to live up to the expectations of the society, of societal, the societal expectations that we get to see. For example, if we see the, in the middle class or in the lower middle classes, the aspirations, they are primarily directed towards clearing examinations like the IIT or AIMS. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but you know, millions of children appearing for very meager opportunities, uh, having a hope of securing a good future, a promising future. And also, when we look at the success rate, it's quite minimal. So restricting yourself without considering your caliber, your interest as to what do you want to do in life. Our students are being, like the horses have its blinkers, a tunnel vision. You know, this entire academic setup forces them to think in a very unilateral fashion, uh, without actually exploring other opportunities that resonate with themselves. And apart from this, when we also discuss the 21st century skills, the skills of cooperation, skills of spirit decor, I mean, a common asset to have, or whether it's communication, the spirit of cooperation, or other things like that. When we go by a single academic bent of mind, we tend to overlook these other relevant aspects, the very essence of being lively, of being human. And that is what our institutions have become in the present. They're churning out factories of machines, basically. So this is creating a lot of chaos in the society as we get to see it in the
Hmm.
present, and it's the younger generations that are suffering.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, definitely. So this is a very recent phenomenon, even in my mind. Back, even if you look back 10 years or 8 years, I don't think a lot of focus was on talking about emotional health or mental health in schools. And even within the past few years, when social and emotional learning has become part of the conversation, we even had 2 to 3 years of pandemic when again the focus went back to academic learning loss and learning recovery, learning slide, and so on. So one aspect of that is definitely it's a very recent thing. The other thing that I also think about is that my experience with socio-emotional learning based work, or when we start talking about empathy at a larger scale, was to do with I was connected to a Delhi government school back in 2017 when the happiness curriculum was sort of just coming up. It got launched in 2018, and even at that time, I had felt that in the piloting of the curriculum, a lot of focus was on managing emotions and behaviors, right? For the sake of, say, increased attendance, or for improving academic performance, or for better relationships with other students in the school, for so called at risk students to maintain a calm and obedient atmosphere in the school. So a lot of the programs that do talk about empathy at a larger scale within our schools uh, talk about it only in terms of managing it for pro-social skills. But I wonder, eh, I don't have the experience of what this curriculum looks like now, but I wonder if structural violence, if structures, if our communities' contexts, if our families' contexts come up in these spaces. Um, we are all witnessing violence in our everyday lives, right? In our homes, sometimes on the street, we are witnessing it on the news, we are experiencing it in our everyday lives, sometimes on the walk to school and back from school, on the internet, and it's coming from roots of gender expression, caste identity, disability, sexuality, the structures, the social structures that stratify us. So I wonder if beyond school reality comes up in these kinds of programs, or in the recipe for happiness. Do we talk about systemic adverse experiences, or do we limit our conversations to individual actions that students should take to manage their emotions better? Um that's a question that I want to bring up.
When you say systemic, systemic, shall we say, failures, what exactly do you mean? You mean society systems, or do you mean academic systems?
I mean all of them. So, for instance, like Shubham pointed out that if we look at our data and it's sad to reduce it to data, but if we look at the number of deaths that happen in so-called elite higher education institutions in our country, a lot of people who are driven to commit suicide are people coming from marginalized locations, from marginalized communities. We also live in a country where the reality is that nearly 29% of our students don't complete primary school. And schools themselves often are sites of trauma as well. So you have bullying, you have violence, you have caste based exclusion. I mean, so many examples of that right from last year when a student in Rajasthan was not allowed to touch a pot for drinking water and was hit really hard. We have sexist and communal tensions coming up in school. And we're surrounded by these examples constantly if we see the news of what schools are like in our country, right? And so if our society is highly unequal uh, and polarized, then schools also become a microcosm of that same reality. And I mean that in talking about empathy and in talking about cooperation, collaboration, all of the 21st century skills, uh, talking about the structures that enable this or prevent this also become part of the conversation in my mind. So, talking about loss is also part of the conversation when we are talking about the pandemic. Talking about domestic violence will also become part of the conversation when a student feels angry in the class rather than just managing the emotion.
One question that arises in my mind when we talk about classroom, is how do we ensure that when a child speaks about these things, there's going to be a sympathetic listening from others and no bullying, and and definitely no talking about this outside that group in the classroom, because definitely this is something that children will say in confidence, right, when they feel safe and when they feel cared for. Do you both have any suggestions about how do you have rules? Do you say in the beginning, please don't repeat what you hear, don't bully? Is there any kind of code of behavior, code of conduct that you have to follow when you do this? Shubham, what
So I
about?
believe,
Huh.
yeah. So I was trying to respond. So I believe having a strict code of conduct, it isn't quite possible, and I'm quite skeptical if that is something that actually works. First of all, as a teacher, we're in any given classroom, about 30 to 40 students are looking up at you. So they are quite obviously going to incorporate things that you as a teacher actually, you know, are doing in the first place. So the onus of establishing a conducive environment in the classroom is that of the teacher. Now, when it comes to the children being actually feeling comfortable into confiding their troubles to the teacher, that is only going to happen when the teacher has the confidence of the students, and that is something which cannot be forced upon the children. We cannot, to actually confine in such things which are very complex and very personal in nature. So the teacher, has to earn the confidence, and that is only going to happen. I mean, it's not a process that could be done overnight or in a very short span of time. It's a prolonged process. How does the teacher communicates with the children? What kind of an interaction does he tries to facilitate or brings about in the classroom? All these
Right.
facets, is he cognizant of the interests, the likes and dislikes of the students, whether or not he provides them, or he or she provides them with the opportunities that they as students tend to, or wish to have for themselves. So there are multiple factors. We've got multiple check boxes, and when all of these are met, that's when the student would, they could eventually confide in their teacher that yes, this is a person with whom I can share my troubles, and it would not just be restricted to sharing one's troubles, but to actually, reaching to a solution to the potential solution as well. So that's
Right.
quite, you know, primary in this whole aspect. What do you have to
So
say,
that's
Ragini,
quite
about
hard
this?
to achieve also. As you say, this confidence building exercise takes time and it doesn't happen overnight. So that's quite a lot to achieve. Shubham, like we've talked about some generalities, I'm going to zero in on something that you've actually written in your article. You've spoken of an otherwise calm and gentle boy who got into real rage over a minor disagreement, and later Shubham learned of his background. Hmm? Could both of you speak about the immense importance of the emotional traumas of childhood which impact learning? Ragini, would you like to speak?
Um, yeah, I think just like what Shubham was just saying right now, and uh, I don't think our lives are fragmented. We all live in the same social world. And as teachers, I also don't hold that while a teacher might hold a lot of power in the classroom and a lot of authority, um, the reciprocity of caring goes both ways, in that in expecting children to be vulnerable and sharing their uh, life stories, I think part is also to be played by the teacher in extending that vulnerability themselves. So definitely, I feel like what we experience before and after school and during school become part and parcel of our whole beings, and it is that whole being that comes to the classroom and experiences the school, so to say. Um, if I've understood your question right, uh, it will definitely impact learning. Uh,
Hmm. Shubham, anything to add to this? Very
Right. So
important.
this particular child, I mean, it's not just about Rajat. It's about countless other children who actually meet the same fate. Because, I mean, the situation is the child is experiencing, events of domestic violence at home. The parents, if we talk specifically about the COVID times, many people, they, lost their livelihoods, their occupation. So in such scenarios, when the parents or the father isn't able to put bread to the table for the family is not being fed. There are recurrent cases of domestic violence. The same child is supposed to turn up at school, that too on time, and when he or she fails to do so, the child further gets punished at school for coming late or for being late at school. So I mean, the child is being uh, sort of sandwiched between both these extremities, between both these tormenting situations. So where he has nowhere to go, the child has nowhere to go. So in these sort of situations, especially being the teachers, when we are aware what sort of an environment our children are, they're forced to live, or rather, what sort of an environment they are being brought up in, the teacher can at least provide them a sort of a safe haven or a sort of a refuge for the time being they're at school, where the child is quite willing to turn up at school every day. We often see children, meeting small gigs like washing vehicles or selling seasonal fruits to make ends meet of the family, to meet their financial requirements as well. And the parents at this juncture, they're not they I mean they have no problem at all with their children, taking care of these gigs rather than going to the school. So even at their level, this awareness needs to be brought out that instead of uh, looking for short gains, ephemeral gains, it's a larger investment, an overall investment to send your child to the school rather than sending him to take care of the cattle or to meet certain small gigs. So there are a lot of things to be taken care of as of now.
Right. We often see that academically sound students are the ones who are encouraged by the teachers to participate in extracurricular activities too. But teachers are also human. So, in a full working day, it's not very easy to be alert to the signals of emotional deprivation. What pointers do you both have to teachers? What can teachers look out for? Because teachers themselves are so rushed, and though we say, we have to do this, that, and the other, the fact remains that There is a curriculum, there is a syllabus. So, how, what pointers do you have? How can teachers be the sympathetic, empathetic, and alert to the signals of children's distress, whether that is temporary or long standing?
I think I don't know about pointers. I don't think there is a uh, set of or a checklist of any kind. But I think that relationships that are built on an ethic of care, they require a lot of time and a lot of space, and um, it requires a lot of listening, talking, and sometimes just being there if somebody would like to share something. Um Also, listening to the needs of the other, our students or other teachers, colleagues, without assuming or without listening to their expressed need rather than assuming the need. Um and also, like I said, admitting to our own vulnerabilities, admitting to also being wrong sometimes. So I think building that kind of a relationship requires time and continuity. That is why in primary, often you have the same teachers working with students over a longer period of time. And also the recognition that caring is coming from a place of love and is also a labor. So often it is women teachers are seen as being more maternal in nature and therefore better carers. So just recognizing that care, building care in the community, in a teaching learning space, in a classroom, also is work. So in terms of classroom dynamics, that would mean perhaps having more participatory classroom dynamics. A lot of traditional classrooms work with competition as a value, work with individual focus. So some kids are better performing, so they are the ones who will sit right in the front and who will nod to everything that the teacher is saying, and the underperforming kids will be sent to the back. So, as opposed to this kind of a traditional classroom dynamic, more participatory work, more collaborating evaluation, where peer assessment is possible, say for instance, respecting individuals and their differences, creating a culture of dialogue, I think. I think those are the kinds of things that also allow for um, space to share vulnerabilities and for signals of emotional deprivation to come out. Um, yeah. Shubham?
Yes, so if I could add a few points to just what you said. So, I mean, first of all, as a common practice, as teachers, we can stop having good, favorite students. This is quite often that teachers end up doing, having favorite students, which further leads to creation of an exclusive group of students, which are quite dearer to the students, when actually that shouldn't be the case. This further brings about a sort of a chasm between in the class itself, and this further leads to creation of an inferiority complex in the children who are otherwise not being favored by the teacher. And this is also associated with another aspect, that is tagging children as brilliant or dull, which is a very recurring phenomena that we get to see till this date. And the teachers are also quite not conscious about it. They just end up uh, tagging children as brilliant or otherwise dull children. But recent studies have corroborated the fact that when you actually tag children, they tend to accept this sort of an identity that yes, I cannot deliver into certain areas because I've been uh, you know named this way. I have this tag that I'm not capable enough to do something, rather than actually looking for what sort of a caliber a child has, and to help that child recognize it and to further build upon it. And when I say this, I'm referring to assessment practices. As teachers, we need to have better and more relevant assessment practices that are not merely restricted to academic aspects. A child who cannot solve mathematical problems flawlessly, or who cannot write properly, might as well be a good singer, a good dancer, or for that matter, a good sprinter. So, having consolidated and comprehensive assessment practices is the need of the hour. And as teachers, we can certainly have look at it. You can certainly consider it.
Thank you, Shubham. So I just want to say Swati Bhandari, one in our audience, says agrees with this and says managing emotions means how someone can respond in adverse situations instead of just reacting. What I understand in socio-emotional learning about acknowledge all your feelings as they are and accepting it, which is of course what we've been saying now, and so she's agreeing with both of you. Thank you, Swati. And Shubham, you say that following SEL into teaching, factoring SEL into our teaching plans and assessment techniques is an integral part of the process and not just an option. This is quite a strong statement. Would you like to tell us how? Ragini, what is your experience been in the matter? So I'd like both of you to, talk to the audience about this particular thing. Factoring SEL as part of the program, part of the syllabus, part of how you run your class, rather than having little areas, you know, which are reserved for socio-emotional learning. I'd really like to ask you both to discuss this point.
We can take turns if you want to go first, Ragini. Okay, so I'll continue. Factoring ACL is not an option. I mean, that's quite evident because if we look at the sort of roles, the job roles that we have at present, they're not restricted to hard skills alone. You need soft skills. I mean, the AI is here today. AI is actually a reality of the present, wherein most of the things that require calculations or these sort of skills that could be done, that could be taken off your balance sheets can be taken care of. In fact, coding could be done by using artificial intelligence and machine learning and things like that. So we actually need rational humans who can make use of these tools, these revolutionary tools. And recent studies have shown that the Indian workforce today, the youngsters, I mean, we are the youngest nation as we speak in the present. But the sort of skills that we have, yes, we have a substantial amount of population that has a good skill set, hard skills. But when we are discussing the emotional aspects, how to deal with a colleague who isn't quite reasonable at times, how to deal with a boss who gets angry over petty issues, or you know, how walking up to someone when you see someone in trouble, or sometimes letting go of one's personal gains for a greater good. That is, I'm referring to team spirit. So these are the factors which actually not make us better humans, but they also have a significant impact on their employability. And that is a very relevant point today that the Indian youth is struggling with. We are simply not being nurtured in these sort of an environment which helps us inculcate these values or these other skills, as we say. So that is what I have to share on this particular theme as to why is SEL important. What is your opinion, Ragini?
Yeah, the thing I would add is that one aspect of preparing I think where you're coming from is to prepare students for living in a world which is knows how to coexist with others and knows how to be tolerant and inclusive, and that's important, and maybe that's one reason why one talks about empathy in the classroom and talks about care in the classroom. For me, I think another way to understand that is uh, what we learn is very intimately connected to how we learn. So, learning math and learning fractions as an objective is not distinct from how I learn that. What are the values of the classroom in which I'm learning that? What are the ways in which the teacher rewards or punishes me for not knowing or knowing the skill, and so on. So, for me, it's not an add-on so much as the very bedrock of the work that we do. So if I imagine the kind of society that we want to live in, then every part of the classroom is is pointing towards that future, and is connected to the aims of education, to the fundamental aims of education. So for me, that it has to be non-negotiable. It can't be something that I completed all my portions and now I have an SEL class. It's very much connected to the everyday reality of what happens in the class, in my mind. And it's not the thing that I want to add to this is that it's not disconnected to the material conditions in which we live. So I want to manage emotions because I want to be able to work in a team in the future, and because I want to work with friends in the classroom, collaborative work. But at the same time, I need to address where those emotions are coming from, and talking about power, talking about hierarchies, talking about how sometimes we wield power and sometimes we feel powerless in situations. Talking about structures becomes part of that conversation then. Because otherwise we're just saying that yes, individual action is all that matters, but a lot of these things are coming from structural issues. So I think talking about that is also important in SEL.
Yeah, those are very important points that you made, and of course, the thing that you've said, that preparing for a future life is what we're trying to, very much part of what we're trying to do in class. And when we say future as teachers, we don't just mean job future, though that's very important. I mean, there's no gainsaying that, but we are also talking about how you face life as a human, as an adult human being, with a number of other adults who may not be always as sympathetic and empathetic to you as you would like, how you negotiate these things. And that was very interesting. And learning, you brought up the point of learning recovery, which was very much the theme of the post COVID classroom. We were going on listening to learning recovery, and it should be more about acquiring the skills of empathy, sympathy, collaboration, and operation. It can only take place when the ground is prepared. What is the ground being prepared? How do you prepare the ground, and in whom and where? Is the ground the classroom, or the teacher, or the child, or a mixture of both? Ragini, would you like to answer that? Not answer, elaborate on that.
Um, like I said, I think it's the very bedrock of the work we do. If the ground in my mind is um, the kind of learning community that gets created in the classroom, and I'm using the word community again and again instead of teachers and students, because I'm trying to question the belief that students need to be educated and teachers are the holder of all knowledge in educating. So the community is very much a shared space, and and it requires work to build a community that believes in these skills, the skills you mentioned, like say empathy, that believes in listening even when an immediate reaction is coming up, that values disagreements even when uh, we feel very shaken by it, or even when we feel angry in response, that wants to have conversations instead of shutting people out, that talks with each other instead of talking at each other. And a lot of our traditional classroom dynamics have been of, one person has to win, one person has to lose for in order for another one to win, and that kind of a structure founded on fear or individualism. So the ground being prepared in my mind is the everyday messiness of classroom dynamics, in which teachers and students are both part, and it's connected to the fundamental aims of education, of what is this business of education that you're trying to do together.
Shubham, what would you like to add to that?
Like you mentioned, that learning recovery was quite a prominent term in the past 2 or 3 years, which was actually the case. As many of the, like if I quote the recent ASAR report, it says that about uh, 80% of children, they cannot, of class third, they cannot read a grade appropriate text. or cannot solve a mathematical problem, which is from a grade appropriate mathematical problem, which could be related to summation or difference, taking out difference or things like that. So definitely, many of those states they have come up with dedicated initiatives to address this particular issue. That is to bring about learning recovery. But I believe a lot of resources and expertise and time and energy have been spent into developing modules, and the sort of monitoring that should occur as to how these modules are being translated, as to how these modules are being brought to the classrooms. So that aspect of monitoring should be taken care of, which I believe is lacking at present. And the kind of training exercises that the government is bringing up for the teachers. So how effective are they, and what sort of an impact have they been able to see? Although we've had a few of surveys and all, but their credibility remains questionable because we do not see such statistics being translated off the ground. So that is an aspect which exists at the policy level, but on ground when we're discussing about teachers. So as coming from a perspective of being a person who works in this domain of contributing their own tiny bit into strengthening our public education system, when we interact with teachers, we get to see teachers who are actually concerned about the well-being of their students. I mean, they really have heartfelt emotions for their students. They want them to lead a better life in future. But by and large, when we see the kind of ecosystem that exists, so there are a number of stereotypes that are quite prevalent in the teachers community as well. For instance, you can hear them say that children coming from X community or X tribe, they simply cannot learn. Whatever, how many initiatives the government brings up, the number of training exercises, you conduct n number of exercises, but still nothing is going to happen. So when that sort of a false conviction takes root in the society, in the teachers community, so it becomes quite a concerning fact. And as educators, as professionals working in this area, it is our prime responsibility to help teachers break these notions by setting examples and by bringing up examples from the field, from teachers who are actually uh, you know uh, implementing practices, and they are at a position wherein they can deliver results as to see these things would be done, and the children they actually learned, they actually delivered. So we need to identify such examples, and we need to bring up them to the larger audience so that those stereotypes can be shattered. So perhaps we can advance from a stringent approach of attaining academic learning recovery, and we can move on to other aspects which have a more humane element to it. So that's my take on it.
Mm. Shefali, who's the other editor of The Learning Curve, and I'm sure all of you, both of you know her, has asked a question. So she's saying, so there is a increasing awareness of socio-emotional learning, but are you seeing it being implemented in the classroom? So we are making lots of initiatives, but are they being implemented? She asks, and she's saying, how are teachers being sensitized on this? What more needs to be done? So there are two questions here which are really very important. One is, are they being sensitized, and what more needs to be done? So that's something that I'm sure all our listeners would also like to know.
I think Shubham would have a better sense of, say, in
Shubham,
Rajasthan, how
yeah,
it's.
because you've just been talking about teacher training. Can you answer this?
I mean, when we're discussing teacher training, it's quite a wide array to discuss. I mean, it would require 2 hours itself, but
Mm,
still, yeah, I can share a few insights. I mean,
mm,
the primary concern is people have been developing, at face value, fabulous modules, but they actually do not get translated on the field,
mm,
because I've had the good fortune of being part of that process where module making takes place and how it actually transacts on the field. So I've been part of both the worlds, and when we compare, so from 100%, what actually trickles to the ground is about 10 or 20% of the original volume that was created. And then again, the volume that drips down to the ground, its quality can be questioned. And then again, there's another aspect. First of all, what was the content weightage of aspects like SEL, which found place in the modules? And then again, we're talking about the delivery. How competent are our KRPs, the key resource persons, or the mentor teachers? How well were they oriented to communicate whatever content the module has to offer? So these are areas which we actually need to, look at as a society, as not just governments. It's not just about the government. And what kind of opportunities are the teachers being given, especially those who are actually trying to make a difference? What sort of recognition are they being provided so that their good work can, like I said previously, their good work actually, spreads and brings about an exponential change. So these are a few things that we need to look at. So definitely things are being done to sensitize the teachers. How much is it being done? Yes, that could be considered. That's a question for consideration. And then again, what more needs to be done? So I believe uh, being in this profession of learning, as teachers, we can develop this habit of, of inquiry, to basically learn more and more, to have relevant conversations within the teachers community. And as professionals working in this particular area, we can help entice such sort of a dialogue. And that's actually a part of our work. That's what we do here. That's what we're trying to do through voluntary forums, through hybrid meetings, and other various uh, you know areas of intervention. So these are a few things that are being done, and but still, it's quite a long haul. We cannot look
Yes.
at an immediate target as of now.
Thank you, Shubham. That was very comprehensive, and thank you very much for that. Um, Ragini, this is quite a complex thing that you've said. You've said that in classrooms that engaged in uh, discussions of difference, power, otherhood, or privilege were deeply held uh, notions and regarding differentiate might be challenged. um, Stirring emotions are evoked. Strong emotions are evoked. What exactly do you mean by otherhood? That's a very dense word. What do you mean by otherhood? Also, it's easy to think that once deeply held notions and assumptions are challenged, the result would be relief rather than invoking strong emotions. Can you explain this? And then perhaps Shubham can also add what his views are, particularly about otherhood. That's something that I'm sure everybody would like to hear about.
Yeah, so I had brought this up in the context of discussing a picture book in a primary school. And the picture book, Ismat's Eid, it's a Tulika publication. And we were just talking about the cover. We hadn't even started reading the story. And it's a funny story about how a chain of events unfolds, which gets funnier and funnier. And it's based in a family in the context of Eid coming up. And while discussing the cover, just to talk about what other stories have we read like this that talk about festivals and so on, I realized that some of the students in the classroom connected the cover with conversations of the hijab ban that were on in the news at the time. This was last year around March, and very strong emotions came up. It's those people who are Pakistani. It's those people who always cause trouble. And for me, it was very surprising because it was coming from a place of such certainty, such surety, that there is an other, and that other is the enemy, and this story must be about them then. So what this alerted me to is that we are living in a very polarized and unequal world, uh, even more so now. I mean, if you just just look around and read the news and just see around us. So to imagine that classrooms then will not mirror that inequality, will not mirror the same hatred or the polarization is very difficult to imagine. So when we talk about difference, or when we talk about whoever we think the other is, so sometimes boys might resist the idea that um, uh, that pink is not a color only for girls, or the idea that girls should also be able to play sports when they want to. Whoever we think is not ours is the other. It often evokes very strong reactions in the classroom, because coming to terms with one's own privilege, or where one lies on the power balance, is a difficult act. Even for us as adults, it's very difficult act. To examine your own life is very difficult, and it sometimes it is met with resistance. Sometimes it is met with silence, avoidance, that we don't want to talk about this. um, but I think that uh, the discussion of these things is very important, because one is witnessing this everywhere. And if we ignore them in the classroom, and if we think that no, classrooms are only spaces for happiness and only spaces for talking about learning outcomes, then we're both doing a huge disservice to our students, who will seek this information from wherever it's possible. And we're also being very uncritical and naive in assuming that students don't live in the same reality that we do. So, what I meant by invoking strong emotions rather than relief is that it's a difficult act to talk about privilege in the classroom with young students. It's a difficult act to talk about our own political histories, our own socioeconomic histories. To bring up caste in the classroom can create a very charged atmosphere. But the if it's a space of safety and a space of dialogue where listening is focused on, then we have to also engage with the resistance, with the anger that comes with it, or with the walls that might be built. And we're basically asking someone to shift something so fundamental and personal to them. Uh, Gender identity, caste identity, class identity, sexual orientation. These are things that are very personal to us. And it's not an easy invite to being asked to shift that. So that's what I meant by saying that when our notions, which are very deeply held, are challenged, sometimes strong emotions come up.
Thank you very much for that, Ragini. This comment here, Siddhant Suman says that when Shubham, Mr. Raturi, spoke of emotional well-being of young children as having crucial bearing upon their professional employability, it's high time such an issue took center stage vis-a-vis official pedagogy. So he's agreeing with what you said, and he's expressing the opinion. Thank you, Mr. Suman. And I think most people would agree with what Shubham said. Then there's one another a small phrase which is also very important, because it's very much part of daily life. You could give it's you said you must value disagreement, and that is something I think as a society we are not taught to do. We either say, okay, okay, it'll all be all right, or we say, we try to brush it under the carpet. We do that, and that's what we are taught to do. And people around children, and even when we were children, nobody actually brought it out in the open, because we didn't have the vocabulary for disagreeing in a sensible, respectful way. So I really would like you to enlarge upon valuing disagreements, how to use them for a learning experience, and what we actually learn when we disagree with somebody or somebody disagrees with us, but we can remain, perfectly cordial and friendly with each other.
Yeah. I think that, like you rightly said, within our families, even within our religious teachings, even within the mass media, if you see any news debate, It's We are taught to fear difference rather than appreciate it, and we often exclude voices that are different, perspectives that are different to our own. And in such a scenario, inviting students to value disagreements in the classroom can be quite a confusing idea, because it goes against so much of the grain of the society we live in. Uh, but at the same time, recognizing that differences are everywhere. We all come from different life experiences, often different languages in the classroom exist, different religious, caste, gender, sexual backgrounds, different abilities, and we often differ with each other. And sometimes these differences lead to disagreement, sometimes they don't. But uh, can we create a classroom culture where uh, disagreements can lead to something constructive rather than destructive? So can we move towards transforming conflicts constructively rather than seeing conflicts as something that end conversations, that divide people into camps? And which is why I was saying that talking with each other rather than talking at each other is something that as a skill we need to learn. And Conflicts, like Krishna Kumar and many other scholars in India, have also spoken about how conflicts need to be seen as a resource within the classroom rather than something that like you said, needs to be avoided or needs to be brushed under the carpet or withdrawn from or managed. Like a lot of times teachers do this, that okay, you say sorry to him, you say sorry to her, and end of story. Uh, like, how do we see conflicts as a resource? And one of the strategies that a group of people in conflict management and conflict resolution talk about, Johnson and Johnson, they talk about something called structured academic controversy. So, for instance, our traditional debates are always that I will choose a position, you will choose a position, and then we will fight till one of us loses and the other one wins. And we have to vociferously defend our stance. That is a traditional debate model. But something they call structured academic controversy requires you to understand, empathize, and analyze the contrary viewpoint, and then deliberate towards working towards a negotiation. So, how do we come together to see things even when we disagree? That is something that we need to build as a skill, and that's why it needs to be valued first and foremost.
Shubham, what would you like to add to this?
I mean, Ragini explained it quite extensively, and
Yeah.
we actually had the discussion last evening too. And I could actually relate these things, what she has to say, where disagreements are emanating in the society and what sort of repercussions they can lead to, and whether or not they are being attributed the kind of acceptance that they should be.
Hmm.
And I recall an instance, in one of the youth events that we had a participant who was otherwise quite active whenever it came to gender issues. Whenever it came about gender issues, she used to, proactively voice her opinions about the same. But when the same, the group was same, and we switched to another theme, when we switched to caste, and when the discussion it veered towards, the kind of atrocities that have been inflicted upon the deprived sections. So she assumed quite an indifferent attitude, as if, not to my knowledge, I don't think these things exist today, or and etc. So, considering an alternative opinion or an alternative outlook, that is definitely the need of the hour, and it's something we need to look at. It's something we need to, try to inculcate in our learning spaces as well, because when we actually have disagreements, that's when we can look at, more creative solutions for problems, and even if we're not directly looking at solutions, but in any progressive society, first of all, we need to have space for dialogue. And when we have space for dialogue, when we have developed that sort of a rationale, there's no way that we can, assume a stance wherein we have no space for disagreements, or we're just not taking an attitude when we can at least hear what the other person has to say.
Hmm.
So definitely, it's something we need to look at.
I agree, and I think one of the things we need to teach our children also is to disagree in a very respectful way, so that nobody is actually offended. But then each of us is allowed to have our own opinion on whatever the thing is. Plus, we also need to allow space and room for other and opposing agreements as well as part of our educational process. I think this is a very important skill, as important as learning to read or write or solve number problems or whatever it is. We are running out of time, but there is one question um, I really have to ask before we close, and that is, I'm skipping a couple of questions, but we definitely need to ask this. You have very effectively brought out that children don't need to be protected from the realities of life. They need to be given tools to handle them positively and effectively. Uh, is this your in this article? It is different. In this article, in this your article is different from Shubham in that he's talking about teachers' tools of management, and you're talking about the children's tools of management. Can you speak about this and bring out the fact that they are actually a complementary process? Um, Teachers and students are working in tandem. So, how would you explain this process?
Yeah, just again, it is this traditional model of classroom dynamics is always that students, even when they are being exposed to uh, harsh realities of life, students are damaged and teachers are the healers. But it's instead, I'm saying that the community that is formed inside the classroom is a shared one. And a lot of times, this idea that the community needs to be founded on certain values of care, of social justice, requires teachers and students to collaborate with each other and exchange ideas rather than one holding all the power and the other just recipients of that knowledge. So uh, so in that way, I definitely think that this idea that children are innocent and they can't see what's happening around us, and or they see it and it doesn't affect them the same way that it does to adults, is coming from a space of either naivety or doing a huge disservice to children, because they will seek answers and they are very much a part of the social world that we are in. And creating that teaching learning community is very important for both teachers and students together, which values exchange of ideas, where we can bring our authentic selves in, where we can bear each other's vulnerability, and where we commit to social justice through dialogue, which requires listening, which requires being there for each other. um, Shubham, you want to add anything?
I mean, you brought very pertinent points, but I recall from our previous discussion that I was a bit skeptical about this approach. As to not to shield children, or rather to wait for an appropriate time. That yes, this sort of a revelation should be brought to the children when they are conditioned enough, when they're mature enough. So that's a kind of an outlook that I had. But when I look at things from your perspectives, yeah, we certainly. I mean, even if we attempt to shield children from the ugly realities of life, we could do that to a very limited degree. I mean, that's not humanly possible to shield them altogether from the the brutalities or the wrongdoings that are there in the society, because they are a component of that very social fabric of which we belong to. But yes, we can make attempts. We can make attempts to actually make them cognizant as well as vigilant about the atrocities or the wrongdoings, and creating a sort of an environment where they see themselves as being bearers of action, or rather people, to make them more action oriented as to what sort of a change can they bring in the society. Like, there was another term in your article wherein you mentioned critical hope, wherein the
Hmm.
children are not looking at something passive, that okay, this is the kind of faith that I've met, and uh, God forbid, this is the life that I have now or I'm going to have. But if we try to inculcate a sort of an action-oriented stance, and when I say action-oriented, I am not, referring to any sort of an activism or a revolutionary sort of an act, but at a personal level, or at the level of a community, actions which can bring a positive impact in their lives, and furthermore, which can be, translated to the people around them, creating such spaces through dialogue, through interaction, through cooperation. Then again, coming back to, all those traits, the relevant skills which actually make us human, or if not skills, traits, I would say. So yeah, I pretty much agree with what you had to say with this in this regard.
There's one last comment and a question from Mr. Kamarjit Chadha, who says, um, how can we, he agrees with all that you've said, but his question is how to develop a pedagogy or method that is used in class. He's asked talking about, social emotional learning that requires to be incorporated. How to develop a pedagogy? Very briefly, if you can answer that question, or just give your, very briefly. And sorry, we can't have more questions than this because it's a little past time also. But if you can just quickly say how you can develop a pedagogy or method of its use
Right. So I think Mr. Kanwajit is asking about talking with each other rather than talking
rather
at
than
each
talking
other.
at each other, what you had
So
mentioned.
yeah, so like I think it's a skill because it's not something that I also like the immediate impulse is always to react to someone that you are listening to, even when you don't agree or disagree. Or so I think actively creating space for dialogue rather than debating, or say doing activities like what I was suggesting, structured academic controversy, or allowing for discussions to happen in a way where people can change their viewpoints after listening to the other. We are not always right, and listening also
Yeah.
helps us understand our own worldviews better, form new knowledge. Um, Listening, how do we listen to each other? How do we talk in a way that doesn't is not hostile, is met with open doors rather than closed doors? I think these are skills that need to be learned.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Shubham, do you have anything to say to that? I think we all agree that, we need
Yeah,
to respond rather than react. But
absolutely. So I just came across this comment wherein Miss Maya, she has to say, she mentioned circle time. So, as of now, we've got multiple exercises that can be conducted to create a more inclusive sort of an environment in the classroom, which is conducive, especially when we are looking at all the metrics of social emotional learning. And circle time is definitely one such method wherein, children should sit together with the teacher. They discuss about their day, the kind of observations they had while on their way from their home to the school, and whatever business that takes place in the life of a regular child. Apart from this, they have, conventional exercises like storytelling. There is rhyme narration, wherein children have a good time while actually learning traditional subjects like mathematics or, for instance, language. Apart from this, there are a few other exercises wherein children have the liberty to actually bring something precious to them. It could be an object, it could be a book, it could be anything they like or which is close to their heart, and they go about explaining, sharing things about it as to why this thing is there, what is it, what sort of an application it has. So there can be multiple ways. There's no limit to it. But as teachers, we need to, because as of now, what we get to see is that we do not have time to take regular classes. How do we expect to, implement all this uh, plethora of innovations that are taking place? So that's a genuine dialogue that is there. So how do we incorporate innovation when, especially we've got so tightly packed schedule, when we cannot take regular classes? So this sort of a, uh, I don't know if I'm using an appropriate word, but I would say stereotype, or rather, the pressure of circumstances. So certainly we can look at, bringing these things into actual practice. So that's what I would like to say at this moment.
it has been most interesting to talk to both of you and listening to your views. And I'm so sorry that we've a little past time. Otherwise, we could have gone on. As Shubham said, this is a topic for 2 hours rather than one. Uh, and I'm sure our audience appreciated it as much as we did. And very, very, very interesting indeed. And so, thank you, Ragini and Shubham, for sparing the time, first of all, to write for us and then appear in this webinar. It's been so very interesting to talk to both of you. And I would also like to thank all the audience for coming here, asking questions. And just to remind you, our next webinar will be on the 6th of September. And we hope that you will join us between 4:30 and 5:30 on the 6th of September. Of course, you'll be hearing from us sooner, closer to the date. And in the meanwhile, thank you very much, all of you who've taken part in this seminar.
Thanks, Prerna. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure.
The pleasure to talk to you.